This episode of the Topcast is proudly supported by Music, beyond sheet music.
We are blessed to live in the time in which we live, because if we can't get what we need right in our 10-mile radius, 100-mile radius, we can just reach out to the world and find people that will be supportive and encouraging, and people that we can also encourage. What is that saying, that a rising tide raises all ships? And so if we can bring up the tide for music education across the world, then I think we're all better for it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Topcast, your home for inspiration, ideas, business, and teaching strategies to help support your teaching and grow your studio. My name is Nicole Douglas, your host for the show, and if this is your first time here, thank you so much for tuning in. You're listening to episode 248. Here's a special welcome to my Top Music Pro teachers. Today's show notes and a full transcript are now available at topmusic.co/episode 248.
Hello, Topcast listeners. Today, I've got Shelly Davis with me. And Shelly, we've seen on our podcast back in 2016 when she was just starting her Piano Parent podcast. And so we've checked in with her for an update today to find out how things have been going. And we're also going to talk about what she's learned by interviewing so many different teachers and parents, and how we can better connect with our parents so that we can help our students succeed the most possible. Shelly lives in Texas, and she has been married for 32 years, and she's the parent of 4 musical children. And so she's got lots of experience in the parent realm, but lots of experience in the teacher realm too. She's been an independent piano teacher since 1990, worked with hundreds of children, and now she's running this podcast and doing amazing work in our field. So welcome, Shelly.
Hi, Nicole. It's so good to see you again. And it's kind of fun to be on the other side of the microphone from what I usually am. You didn't mention this. I'm going to toot your horn for you. Tim invited me on his podcast, but he was also a gracious guest on my podcast. And you have been on my podcast a couple of times. So if listeners are interested, I'll let you know how they can listen to those interviews. But it's really good to see you again, and nice to have the table turned right now.
Yes, I know. I hope I can do as good as you.
Oh, you will. Yes.
Okay, so today, like I mentioned, you were on the podcast in 2016. So will you give us an update? What has changed in your life since you started this podcast?
A lot has changed. I recorded an episode this morning, actually. I recorded episode 250 this morning. And it occurred to me that way back in the day, I would introduce my episodes as, this is episode 010 or 010, whatever. I couldn't wait to get out of the zeros. And so now here we are. And Tim was so kind to invite me on his show when I had only recorded 10 episodes. And so it was nice of him to encourage me and support me. Listening to his podcast is what gave me confidence to try to do my own. One of the variables for me starting my own podcast. Back in the day, I would print out an outline and I would write out all of my talking points. Now I do more with Post-it notes. I don't have a team, but I do have a volunteer, another piano teacher, Dawn Ivers, who I believe has also been on Tim's podcast. She is wonderful to help me with some brainstorming sessions and does graphics. And so she and I have Asana that we kind of communicate with each other. And so things are a little more streamlined. I wish I could say that I was better with a schedule. And maybe batching episodes ahead, but that's a constant struggle for me. I don't want to be too far ahead, but then I don't want to be working by the seat of my pants either.
For sure. And I had asked Shelly about how it was to run a podcast a little bit, because we do have some teachers that ask us from time to time how to get started with a podcast. So thank you for sharing a little bit about what it's like in the behind the scenes for you to make that happen. That's exciting.
I'm constantly thinking of ideas of, that would be an interesting thing to talk about. But then you have to develop the idea. And if you're going to invite someone to join you, then the scheduling thing. And I still get nervous asking people to come on the show. everybody has been very kind, and I don't think anyone has really turned me down other than just we couldn't work out the schedule or something. So be brave and give yourself time for the post production with editing and all of the things that go along with the recording. But it's gratifying.
For sure. Yes. So, again, tell us an update in the last few years. What's changed in your teaching life? And, we, of course, have gone through the pandemic, so everything is kind of in upheaval through that. But what else has changed for you because you started the podcast?
Oh, because I started the podcast, maybe technologically, I feel a little bit more confident. When the pandemic occurred, it was an easy switch for me to invite my students to join me on Zoom because I had already been using Zoom for my podcast interviews. Back in the day when I first started doing podcast episodes, I would have my phone connected to an external speaker and try to get the speaker up really, really close to the microphone. So it was very primitive. So that was one advantage. I also, because of working on my website for the podcast, I feel like I understand a little bit more of how to use WordPress and to include different plugins and those sorts of things. And that can filter into my studio website to try to help my parents stay very informed. I have an online scheduler for podcast guests to be able to find an appointment that's convenient for them. I'm using that same scheduler this summer so that my parents can sign up for lessons. Our summer schedule is very flexible. And so I've had parents booking a lesson and, oh no, we're going to grandma's, so we're going to cancel that lesson and book another one. And they can take care of all of that by themselves. I don't have to.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
What software are you using for that?
I use Calendly.
Okay,
I just started using it. I had been using another one that I was very pleased with, and they went out of business. So I'm grateful
That's so
for
frustrating.
Calendly. It is.
Okay, awesome. Good. Okay, so technologically, you feel like you've learned a lot of skills. How about in terms of your teaching? Do you think your teaching has changed because you have been running the podcast?
I would say in some ways, maybe not. I've been teaching for so long just because, I feel like I'm pretty grounded as far as teaching goes. On the other hand, though, I've had, just like you and I are having this one-on-one conversation, I've had one-on-one conversations with some amazing teachers in our field. I feel like it's been personal instructions for me, and then I have the advantage of recording it and sharing with other people. So a few months ago, I interviewed Marvin Blickenstaff, and now I think of him when I talk about shaping the phrase and all of the expression that he teaches so eloquently. There was another lady who is not in the piano teaching world. Her name is Dr. Kathy Cook, and she inspires teachers and inspires parents. And her company is called Celebrate Kids. And we talked about how kids are smart and using all of the different intelligences in a piano lesson. And so I feel like my teaching probably has improved just because of learning from all of the wonderful guests that have come on the show.
That's awesome. I know that too. The more I talk to teachers and visit with other teachers, the more my teaching gets better.
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard when we're stuck in our own little environment and we're so busy that it's hard to try new things. But when we talk to people, it helps us gain confidence and have a support group to help us.
Yes. And I would even say, I feel the same thing with, there are lots of different social groups, Facebook groups and all of that. And maybe even not to criticize another teacher, but maybe when I read how they resolve a situation or how they handle a different situation, it helps me think critically in my own mind if I would handle it the same way. So maybe I learn what not to do, but that also improves my own teaching or my own philosophy of teaching.
For sure. And that's actually how we learn in general. Like a lot of our students learn by learning what not to do.
Yes.
And I'm finding that the students who are afraid to make mistakes take longer to learn than those who make the mistakes and learn from the mistakes. So
I agree. Anytime I hear the word mistake these days, it makes me think of Benjamin Zander. Are you familiar with him?
Yes.
And his book, The Art of Possibility. I picked it up this summer and started reading, and then I got distracted with a different book. But one of the things that I read was whenever you make a mistake, according to Benjamin Zander, you should view it with curiosity and throw your hands in the air and say, how fascinating. And I wish we
That's
could
wonderful.
help our children, help our students be more curious. And why did my fingers want to do that? Instead of, climbing up and shutting down and, oh, I'm not perfect. No, let's use that to explore and discover.
Yes, I like telling my students, you noticed, like when they catch their own mistake, I like saying, oh, I'm so glad you caught that. Or,
Yes.
that's the first step is, do you even recognize that you made a mistake?
Right. Way to go. Good listening.
Yeah. I'm so proud of you for catching that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, thinking about parents, you had mentioned to me that one thing you've noticed by interviewing so many different teachers and experts and professionals is this theme that music teachers have a different level of parent support at home. In general, that there's quite a few teachers out there who had strong parent support and that you've noticed a theme there. Can you tell us more about that?
It's been really interesting whenever I interview a teacher and they come on the show, I love to hear their origin story. How did you even become interested in piano? Were you interested in piano or were your parents wanting that for you? And the spectrum is wide with their interest versus parental encouragement. And so many teachers, it seems that so many teachers have sort of like a crisis moment where maybe they reach a point where they feel like it's too hard, or they have a personality conflict with the teacher, or they get interested in other things. And I love hearing the stories from these teachers of how their parents still encourage them. Maybe if there is a personality conflict or a teaching style that didn't connect with their child, then they would find another teacher or go to a different school. It didn't mean the end of piano study, it just meant a pivot. I spoke to a teacher a few weeks ago, and she said that she had that issue when she was younger, and then her parents found another teacher for her, loved her, continued on, went to college for music, and then hit another kind of weak spot, or a obstacle to have to overcome. And her parents were almost adamant, you're in college, we're going to see this through, you're going to finish this, we've come too far to stop now. And I think it's beautiful how important parents are in teachers' lives. And now we can enjoy the outcome. We see what the result was. But for parents of our students now, they don't have that advantage, especially if they didn't study music themselves. And so when there is a
Sure.
struggle, or they hit a challenging part, I feel like a lot of parents these days wonder, should we just let them quit? Is this the time? Maybe piano's not for them. And there are so many activities for children to be involved in these days. I think parents would be tempted to quit a little too soon. And so for us as teachers, if we can help parents hear these stories and recognize that, no, maybe we just need to shift the music that we're studying, or find some way to pivot without completely giving up. Now, I agree, and I admit music's not for everyone, and there will come a time when students will quit and stop or move on to something else. But we can try to extend it as long as we can before that happens.
Yes. One thing that I have noticed is, yes, that parents today, because the educational environment has changed to be more student-led at a lot of different realms, we're trying to think about how do we meet the student need where they're at and be individual in our teaching. So part of the trickle-down effect from that is parents feeling like parenting needs to be child-led. And yes, there are times when we do want the child to be involved in decisions or in what's going on there. But it's hard to know as a parent today, I don't want to be too pushy, but I want to push them to succeed. And one thing that I experienced is I don't think my parents pushed me hard enough, because I had talent and they were just so excited about my talent. I wonder what would have changed for me had they set expectations just a little bit higher. However, I was also a very stubborn child. And so if they had pushed back, they may have feared that it would become a battle. And so maybe for me, my journey was they needed to stand back and just listen and cheer me on, and not push me. It really depends. It's hard to know as a parent what's the right course of action. So to get back to thinking about these music teachers that you've interviewed, you said there was a crisis moment where a parent stepped in and said, it's going to be okay. Let's try something new. Let's do something different. Do you have any advice for teachers today to help them connect with their studio parents better so that they can kind of have those discussions and inspire the students in a way that doesn't cause contention or stress?
Right. I think just the fact of calling attention to the value of a parent is so important. The way I think of it is in the child's life, the parent, at least until until they hit the teenage years, their parent is the person they love the most. I mean, the strongest relationship. Once they get into their teen years, they're trying to, be independent, and all of that's understandable. But for parents, for teachers to recognize the value of a parent in a student's life, and to recognize and let the parents know how vital they are in their child's success. We only get to see our kids, our students, for an hour, 30 minutes, whatever the time period is, once a week, less than that when we're on a summer vacation or whatever. And so the time in between lessons is extremely important. And I think helping our parents understand that piano study is different from sports activities or dance activities, things where they practice when they get together. And maybe they might, my nephew is on a baseball team. So his parents have hired a pitching coach. So he has, extra practice outside of the team gatherings, but it's different for piano. The real actual work happens in between the lessons, and the parent is responsible for that. I think a lot of parents make the mistake of thinking that their child will just practice, and if they don't, then maybe they're not interested in piano. But we don't take that philosophy when it's time to go to bed or get up or do our homework. I mean, there are certain things that parents are, I hate to use the word demand, but require is maybe friendlier. Parents require certain things of their children, and our job as teachers is not only teaching the child, but we also have to educate the parent to help them understand how things work for them to get the most return on the investment of the lessons they've paid for.
And I think it's helpful too, to think about how many adults we've heard in our lives that have told us that they wished they hadn't quit piano.
Yes.
And as a parent, I sometimes have to say, I know right now you're not into this, but I feel like this is best for you right now, and hang in there, because there are benefits that are going to come from this, even if you don't see them today. So hang in there. And we can find ways to celebrate small achievements and motivate them through it, even if they're not into the actual amount of practice. Now, myself as a teacher, I have found that sometimes the reason for not being motivated to practice comes from outside things. Maybe they feel alone when they practice. And you and I have talked about that. And,
Right.
What are the underlying reasons why students don't want to practice? So sometimes parents have to be there to ask those questions, like, why don't you want to practice? And then so as a teacher, we have to figure out what questions to ask our studio parents. Have you done any kind of talking about or interviewing with people about piano parent parties?
I've never thought of piano parent parties.
Yes, I've run into a couple of teachers that have tried this, and it strengthens the relationship between the parents in their studios. And that's helped them realize they're not alone in their effort to try to help their students practice.
That's interesting. So what do? They just come together and
coffee and listen to a song and just get to know each other. Occasionally, I have heard of a teacher who will play a song for them or demonstrate something, or do a rhythm exercise, like rhythm cups or something. because sometimes we think about how our students feel lonely because they're taking private lessons, or if they have group, sure, that's great too. But if they're using private lessons and they don't know anybody else who plays the piano, or their friends don't play the piano, then they feel alone. And sometimes we forget that parents can feel alone too. They feel like I'm the only one that's got my kids in this many things, and I have to run all these places, and I've got 3 kids, and what do I do? And yeah.
Years ago, a friend of mine and I did Suzuki, the Suzuki method. We trained for that and became certified in book 1. And I think she went on to book 2. But one of the really valuable things that we learned from that were that a lot of Suzuki teachers have parent orientation, and they bring parents in and let them know about the expectation. They actually go over their policies line by line about makeup lessons. Are you welcome to come into the lesson, or should you drop off? Where should you park? I mean, all of these details, but they just have a gathering to discuss all of these things up front and how to set up good practice routines. And I'm sorry to admit that I haven't done that, but I thought it was a brilliant idea.
Yeah. Another idea I recently heard about, since we're on the topic of talking about how do we get parents on board and to feel like they're part of this community, that we're a combined effort, a partnership, is to have our students help record a video of the studio policy. So you know how when you go on the airlines, you'll see a video of, sometimes they've switched to videos of the safety protocols.
Yes.
And making them like a Rube Goldberg thing where it just goes from scene to scene and make it like a fun video to watch. An idea that I just had I can't remember where I got the idea from, but we were talking about it recently, is to create a studio policy video where you cut to different like 5-second or 10-second clips of our students reading parts of our studio policy and wearing something silly while they do it or whatever.
Yes.
And then you just send that video to brand new families, or every semester you send that out, or maybe you make an update here or there. But that can be a fun way to help you feel unified.
Yes,
as a group.
And to guarantee that parents are going to watch it because they want to see their babies.
Exactly.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. So part of this idea of partnering with our studio parents to help them feel encouraged is, creating this community feel that we're on their side, we're on their side, and all in the service of helping the student have the most successful experience possible.
Absolutely.
Stuff is going to happen.
Bring your scores to life with Maestria by Music. Maestria is the first optical music recognition technology powered by artificial intelligence. From a simple picture of a paper score, Maestria can create an interactive live score that you can listen to, speed up, slow down, and transpose. Live scores are compatible with music and any music notation software or digital audio workstation. Find out more about Music and Maestria and create your first live score at music.com/Maestria. That's music, NEWZIK.com/MAESTRIA. Music, beyond sheet music.
So, what do you see as challenges today that make it hard for parents to help at home? We briefly touched on how education is moving towards more student-centered learning, and so we get unsure as a parent how far to push. Other things you can think of that make it harder for parents now?
Well, I mentioned before that there are so many activities for students to be involved in. And I think parents want to give their children, access to lots of different things. Because until, a young child, you don't know what they're going to be interested in. Maybe dance will be their thing. Maybe sports will be their thing. And so I applaud parents, and I'm grateful for all of the opportunities. But at some point, you have to guard your time, and you have to choose, what are you going to continue being involved in? What are you going to have to set aside? And a child, if you ask them, yes, I want to do all of the things. And years ago, before we had so much going on, probably, I don't know, maybe 25 years ago, my early days of teaching, I had a family who never practice. They would come to their lesson every week, had never opened their books. We weren't making any progress. And I felt guilty, still collecting money, but we're not getting anywhere. And I
Mhm.
talked to the mom about it. I said, they're not making the progress that I'm sure you would like to see them make. And I learned that this mom had a completely different philosophy about piano study than I had. She wasn't necessarily interested in progress. It was just a healthy, engaging mental, physical activity for her children to do every week. And that was enough
Hmm.
for her. She said it keeps them out of the front of the TV. It gives them something to do. You're another parental or adult type influence in their
Yeah.
lives. So I'm thrilled. And as long as I
Yeah.
knew that that's where she was coming from, I can be thrilled too. And
Yeah.
be a little more gracious with the kids. Okay, we know you're not going to practice, so this is what we can do in this
Mhm.
situation.
Okay. So finding out parent expectations is important. And you have to marry that too with what expectations you would like to have in your studio.
True.
Yeah.
And your reputation. I would never
Mhm.
have enrolled those students in some sort of public recital or anything like that, because that's going to look bad on me. And so, as a teacher and owner of my studio, I
Mhm.
can choose if I will accept a student like that, or if I
Mhm.
have different goals for myself, then I can recommend that she find a different teacher.
Mhm.
And that's something else that I don't know if you're ready to go there yet, but that's
Mhm.
something else that we had talked about, how valuable a community of teachers is for us and for parents.
Yeah. Before we get to that, one more thing I wanted to say about that is, as far as being worried about reputation, one thing that I've found helpful is when I do my recitals, sometimes I'll take just 30 seconds or less to share something that the student is doing outside of piano. And
Mm,
so if I have a student who is super busy and yet they're still doing piano, I'll say that this student is taking 7 dance classes right now and she's
yes.
still working on piano. Let's all celebrate. Or this student is in 3 baseball teams because they do travel and school and whatever. And and that way it helps shift expectations of the studio parents that are listening to know, oh, well, because they're so busy, I shouldn't expect them to be like a concert pianist.
Yes. And it lets them know that it's okay for their children to
Hmm.
be involved in other things, but
Hmm.
still keep piano going. They don't have
Yes,
to do either or.
exactly. Hmm.
Good. That's smart.
Okay. So talk to us more about this community of teachers concept that you've discovered.
One thing that my personal philosophy, and I don't know if it's come through interviewing people for the podcast or just interacting with teachers on our social groups. I'm so grateful for our social groups and to be able
Mhm.
to be friends with people that I've never met face to face, but I feel like you and I are friends, Nicole. Thank you very much.
Yes.
um, I feel like teachers have a tendency, some teachers, how much can I qualify this? Some teachers have a tendency to possibly be a little possessive of their students. And if a family chooses to leave your studio, it can be hurtful. And I think sometimes teachers can tend to, or have their instinct is to take that personally. And I was sharing with you earlier that in our local association, our teachers are friends with each other, and it's not uncommon for once I get a student to a certain point, let them know this is as far as I can take you. I recommend you go to this other teacher who is a friend of mine in my association, and I've gotten their students, and maybe they move to so just a more convenient location or all kinds of different reasons. But rather than seeing it as a competition between teachers, a new word I learned not too long ago is called co-opetition, where we co-op with each other, we work with each other, we support each other professionally, but then we also celebrate the successes of our students collectively. We do different activities like our state theory test. We all come together to administer that test. So we see the same students year after year, and we see them in our festivals and all of that. So if a student needs to leave our
Mhm.
studio, to not take it personally and to encourage their progress and support them in their other decisions. One thing that I tell my students when they leave, because I live in a fairly small town, and I let my students know we can still be friends. I recognize you're moving on to other things. Maybe you're dropping piano because you want to pursue band. I will applaud for you every time I see your band successes. And when we see each other in the grocery store, we can, we're friends. And so I hope teachers can have that same type of feeling. We don't have to be competitive with each other. We can be cooperative and support our parents and our students, even if they choose to move to another studio. I don't know how many teachers you had in your growing up years, Nicole, but I had 3, 4, maybe 5. And I learned wonderful, valuable things from each one, not just how to play piano, but how to do life. One teacher was kind of chaotic in her household, and her kids were in and out, and the dogs were whatever, and so I still tried to learn, but now I know that I don't want a chaotic studio. And so anyway, we learn from everybody.
We do. We do. So we've heard on social networks and different teachers we've talked to that occasionally there are these local groups that are competitive in a negative way and don't support each other. And I'm sure you'd agree with me. There are other options out there if you're near trying to be a part of a group that's doing exams and they're stealing students from each other. That's definitely not a healthy professional arrangement. And so we can look for other ways to find supportive groups that are going to help enrich us. At the end of the day, we want to inspire as many students as possible to have wonderful experiences with music. And sometimes that comes from other teachers. And when they're done with us, we hope that they leave such that if they ever wanted to come back to studying music, whether with us or somebody else, that they have a positive experience. I remember one time I had a student who was doing pretty well with music, and I was so excited for him, but he decided to study musical theater more and didn't have the time to do piano. And so at my recital, we all knew he was moving on. I just said, I had him stand up in front of everybody, and I just said, just give him a big hand. He's moving on because he's decided he's wanted to do this. And if for some students, I don't celebrate that they're leaving, but for this particular one, I felt like he needed to know that he wasn't a quitter. And it's interesting because about 2 years later, his mom messaged me and said, thank you so much for what you did. He's getting back into piano now because they had moved to a different state at that time. And, we always want to keep the door open to study music for the rest of our lives. And if we don't work together as a community of teachers, it's going to be so much harder to change society to see music as a healthy, positive thing. And we need everybody to be able to make that worldwide goal of helping music make a difference.
I agree with you completely. And I'm so glad that you brought me back to reality. I'm very grateful for the community that I live in, and it's hard for me to imagine those situations. But I agree with you, and I know that they exist. And like you mentioned, if your local group is not ideal and not what is fulfilling and enriching for you, we've mentioned social media. There are groups online that you can join that can be supportive, and within those there's still very varieties too, and you can choose how involved or not involved you're in. We are blessed to live in the time in which we live, because if we can't get what we need right in our 10-mile radius, 100-mile radius, we can just reach out to the world and find people that will be supportive and encouraging, and people that we can also encourage. What is that saying, that a rising tide raises all ships? And so if we can bring up the tide for music education across the world, then I think we're all better for it.
I love that. I have not heard that quote before. I love it. Okay, so to kind of sum up where we're at so far, we've talked about how to build community with our parents, among each other and teacher to parent, and a few suggestions for how to help inspire our students when they're feeling a little bit like piano's hard. So working with the parent to help the student figure out why are they struggling. And we've talked about teachers getting support from each other and helping
Yes.
make a difference that way. Do you have any other advice or thoughts to share regarding parents and music education?
I know that especially when I was younger and hadn't been a parent for very long, and the parents that brought their children to my studio, they were older than me, and
Mhm.
I was very intimidated if there were some sort of breach to my studio policy or the way I wanted things to happen. I tended to be the one to buckle because I didn't want to confront a parent, or anyway, I was just not secure and confident in my own teaching. And I'm grateful, I've gained experience over the years, and
Mhm.
I'm not harsh or mean or anything like that. I still do everything I can to work with my parents, but I have learned how to deal with different situations better, so that I'm not the one that's buckling all of the time. And I'm grateful that we have young teachers coming into the field. I feel like music education, at least I think it's perpetuating itself fairly well.
Yes.
We're bringing in new teachers. Just a side little rabbit trail, real quick. I met a few months ago with a former student of mine. I say that she's the crown and my jewel of piano teaching because she studied with me all the way through high school graduation, went to college for music. She was a band director for several years, and now that she's got children of her own, she's wanting to be at home. So she's starting her brand new piano and woodwind private studio. And we got to get together for coffee, and I gave her some encouragement. And within my association, one of my former teachers is a member, and now one of my former students is a member. So I feel like we've got three generations, but that's a whole
That's
other thing.
wonderful. Yeah.
But to encourage these new teachers that are coming on board, and maybe they haven't gotten their confidence completely. That's one of the reasons why I started the podcast to begin with. I would listen to teachers kind of struggle with different situations, maybe frustration that parents didn't understand that piano lessons are different from other activities. And so I
Mhm.
wanted a resource for parents to be able to listen to and learn, kind of get the inside scoop on how piano lessons work and how they can support their child at home. But I'll tell you, Nicole, as this podcast has grown, the majority of my listeners are piano teachers.
Mm.
And I'm happy with that. If my podcast gives especially those younger teachers some support and some ideas of how they can do things in their own studio, then that's
Mhm.
wonderful. And then a lot of those teachers will share certain episodes or just the whole podcast with
For
their
sure.
parents. Sometimes it's easier to say, hey, listen to this thing and we'll discuss it later, rather
Mhm.
than broaching a subject that's a little confrontational on your own.
Yeah. I
So I'm happy
recently
to.
recorded an episode with Becky Laurent on all that she's learned from
Yes.
dyslexia. And
Yes.
I have a parent right now that I think I'm just going to send that link to and say, I just wonder, is anything ring true? And that way I don't have to say, did you know that your daughter is having a hard
Right.
time reading from left to right, or whatever the scenario is?
Right.
Like,
Right.
I'd love to grab your thoughts on this.
It's so good to let our
Mhm.
parents kind of learn by being a fly on the wall. And
Yeah.
I think it's very helpful and a little more comfortable for teachers in certain situations.
Mhm. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Now, you have been telling me just a little bit about a project that you've started.
Yes.
Tell us more about this project that you're working on.
Well, and it's just in the baby phases. So maybe this will be like that episode that Tim invited me on all those years ago, and this will grow and we can come back and talk about it. But I've been thinking about music and how difficult it is to teach children to sight read music. And we try to think of all these, some people like mnemonic phrases, some people don't. And just we work so hard to try to help children connect with music. And then the opposite side of that is, well, let's just give them tools to be able to improvise and compose and maybe make their own music. And I am toying with a project of maybe reverse engineering music, because to give a child a blank staff, or even just to let them sit at the piano without music in front of them, sometimes that's debilitating. I don't know where to start. A blank canvas can be
Mhm.
terrifying. time. But then to try to read all of this information to make music out of it is also scary. So I have put together, I've got a little sampler, and I'll let you know how to get that, of different puzzles and worksheets and activities for children to do, that they kind of follow this step by step, almost like a connect the dots sort of thing. And when they're done, they have created music. They've recreated a folk song or something like that. But I'm calling it music makers. And the latest thing that I'm working on is with intervals, and how important it is for children to be able to play intervals, recognize intervals in their music. And if they can't do it from something that's already written, maybe if we go backwards and tell them, write this note and then write another note that's a fifth down, that will help them to slow down and start to recognize how melody lines move. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah. It reminds me of an educational philosophy is parts to whole or whole to parts.
Yes.
And that sometimes we have students that need the details first before they can see the big picture. But we have other students who need to see the big picture before they're willing to be interested in the details. And to reverse engineer music or to approach things from a different viewpoint can really reach students in a different way.
I hope so. I hope it'll be helpful. It makes me think of like a color by numbers thing. I don't know how to paint, but if I can follow, painting red where the threes are. And so I'm hoping it'll be something that'll be helpful. Just another tool.
Wonderful.
For people. And if you're interested in that, and if you're interested in listening to that episode way back a long time ago when Tim interviewed me, or when I got to interview Tim, I got to ask him about his original story, how he got into piano lessons. I also have interviewed Nicole 2 times. So I have put together a special page on my website where you can get all of that information all at one place. And you'll just go to pianoparentpodcast.com/topcast. And I'll put all of those resources together. And if you're interested in the Music Makers worksheet, I'll have access to that too.
Wonderful. And I will put that link definitely in the show notes.
Thank you.
And on the website for the podcast episode. So how can teachers connect with you going forward besides that website? So the main website is pianoparentpodcast.com.
Yes, pianoparentpodcast.com is the website where you can search for past episodes. You can look up categories of episodes. Episode 250 that I just recorded this morning will come out later in July. And it's a 10th episode, or I do a list of 10 things. But another place to catch me is I love being on Instagram, and that's just at Piano Parent Podcast. A lot of people will send me direct messages there, and it seems like that's the best way for me to connect with people, and I'm grateful for it.
Wonderful. Yeah. This has been fabulous. I want to remember that quote that you said in the middle, something about the ships.
Yes, let me look it up so I can give it to you better.
Okay.
It's something about a rising tide. A rising tide lifts all boats. A rising tide lifts all boats. But I love the thought of that.
Yeah.
That we don't go against the tide, and if it's going up, we all get to enjoy that. And if it's going down, it's going to affect everybody too.
Yeah. I love that in our recitals, the older students inspire the younger ones, because the younger ones look at what they're playing and they think, wow, I want to do that someday. And yet at the same time, the younger ones are inspiring the older ones because they see how far they've come. Like, oh, I remember playing that song. And that's my favorite reason for having group performances and recitals is they help inspire each other. And so when one student raises the tide, all the students can come up, like you're saying.
Yes. And even at a gathering like that, a recital, I'm so glad. I hope, that we continue on a trend of being able to gather together and all of that after the year we've come out of. But I love seeing the parents encourage each other. And I remember when my child was just starting, and they encourage the children, but then they're encouraging each other. And community is just such a beautiful, important thing.
It is. It is. And thank you for all you're doing to help teachers learn more about parents and parents learn more about piano. And that's just a fabulous service you're offering.
I appreciate that. I'm enjoying it. I'm very fulfilled by doing it. And hopefully the knowledge that it's helping other people is even better. So thank you for letting me share with your listeners. This has been a great chat. I enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Well, we will see you next time then.
This episode is over, but if you heard about an event, product, or service and didn't have a chance to write it down, don't worry. We list everything you've heard about in this episode in the show notes, or head to topmusic.co. I'm Nicole Douglas, and you've been listening to the Topcast. See you next time.
For more information about this episode and to find out how to enhance your own teaching, visit topmusic.co. You'll find everything you need for your studio, from lesson plans to cheat sheets, quick win teaching ideas, and guides on how to build your teaching business. Plus, you'll be connected to a global community of the world's top music teachers. And when you're ready, join hundreds of other teachers around the world by becoming a Top Music Pro member and get access to all our bonus content and flagship courses. And don't forget to follow topmusic.co on social media and subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. That's all for today. We'll see you in the studio.